Hey everyone, hope you all are doing well. Welcome back on my channel Plain-UPSKILL. This is our second episode in reasoning series. In the first episode, we saw how to count the number of triangles from given figures. Today, we are going to learn how to count the total number of squares from given figures. Today's questions are quite popular in various competitive exams. So we are going to learn how to count the total number of squares in such figures using very short and quick tips, and these are quite easier than the first episode's count the number of triangles problems. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Let's start with the type 1 problems that are often encountered by us. As you can deduce from the figure that these type 1 problems are the one where number of rows is not equal to the number of columns. So let's try to count the total number of possible squares in these figure. But would you like to give it a try? Pause the video if you want to try, and when you're ready, just continue the video. So as you have reached till this part, let's see how it's solved. If we physically try to count the total number of squares in this figure, then there's a huge possibility that we would end up with wrong number of figures. So in order to solve this type of question, we use a simple formula called R into C. So by looking at this formula, someone might think that the total number of squares we can count is just simply by multiplying the total number of rows and columns together, and that is our total number of squares possible in the figure. But it's not quite right. So let's see how this formula actually helps us calculate the total number of squares. First, we note down the total number of rows and columns as seen in the figure. So from a figure, we get 4 rows and 3 columns. Now, using the R into C formula, we first multiply all the number of rows and columns together and write their sum on the right hand side. Then, we keep decreasing one row and one column step by step until our row or our column, any one of those, reaches 1. Like this. As in first step we wrote 4 into 3, we got our total as 12. In next step we decrease one number and write 3 into 2, which gives us total 6. Similarly, one more step further, we write 2 into 1, which gives us 2, and this is where we stop, because if we go any further, the next digit is going to be 0, and anything multiplied by 0 is 0. So in this technique, we first multiply the total number of rows into columns and write its product on the right hand side. Then from further steps, we keep decreasing the number of rows and columns one by one until any one of those reaches 1. Also, the product that we got on the right hand side is to be added so that we get the total number of squares possible in such figures. The total product we got on right hand side is 12, 6 and 2. So by adding 12, 6 and 2, we get the total number of squares possible in this figure. Thus 12 plus 6 plus 2 gives us 20, which is our answer. Total number of possible squares in this figure as 20. Let's take a look at one more example to get a better understanding of this concept. Let's try to calculate total number of squares possible in this figure. So first, we count the total number of rows and column in the figure. And in this figure, we get total number of rows as 4 and total columns as 6. Then, according to our R into C formula, we first multiply the total number of rows into columns and get our required product. So first we multiply the total number of rows into columns and we get 4 into 6 equal to 24. We write the product at right hand side. Then, as we did previously, we keep decreasing the number of rows and columns one by one and keep multiplying the result and storing the product on the right hand side. So in next step we get 3 into 5 equal to 15. Similarly, 2 into 4 gives us 8. And finally 1 into 3 gives us 3. Now finally we sum up all the products and calculate our total number of possible squares in this figure. So we get 24 plus 15 plus 8 plus 3, which gives us 50 squares that are actually possible in this figure. So this was the type 1 problem that was very easy to tackle, and in case if you are making notes, Feel free to pause the video or even rewind if you have missed on any concepts. And if you're ready, let's jump on to the next type of questions. Now, try to count total number of squares possible in this figure. Do you want to give it a try? Feel free to pause the video, and when you're ready, continue with the video. Did you try? Did you get the answer? If yes, good work then. And for the rest of you guys, let's see how it's solved. Well, here you can see that number of rows and number of columns are both equal in this case. So the type 2 problem is where the number of rows and columns both are equal. But even in this case, the trick to solve the sum is exactly the same as the previous type. Again, we write the total number of rows and columns in this figure. And we have the total number of rows and columns in this case equal to 4. We perform the same method as we did in previous case, that is rows into columns method. So by applying the rows into columns formula, we get 4 into 4 equal to 16, and then keep decreasing one row and one column simultaneously. We get 3 into 3 equal to 9, 2 into 2 equal to 4, and 1 into 1 equal to 1. Also, here you can notice that we are multiplying same numbers twice because the number of rows and columns are same in this case. So in other way, we can write it as the total number of squares possible in this type of figure equal to 4 square plus 3 square plus 2 square plus 1 square, which gives us 30. Thus, the total number of squares possible in this figure in 4 cross 4 square is 30. Let's take a look at one more example of this type to get things more clear. Count the number of total squares possible in this 6 by 6 figure. Give it a try by yourself. When you're ready, continue the video. Okay, now let's find out the total number of squares possible in this figure. Now, taking into account that again total number of rows and columns are equal, that is 6. So total number of squares possible in this figure is equal to 6 square plus 5 square plus 4 square plus 3 square plus 2 square plus 1 square, which gives us a grand total of 91 possible squares. Well, this is the most easiest type of problems in count the number of squares figure. Now let's get to some more complicated looking types of figures. Here we go. Count the total number of possible squares in these two figures. Pause the video right now to give it a try by yourself. When you're ready, come back again. So, did you get the answer? If not, let's see how it's solved. When you look at these two complex figures and try to just manually count the total number of squares possible, this might prove a little more hectic. Also, there is no guarantee that you would end up with right number of figures. So, before jumping on to solving these two type of figures, let's just understand one basic concept. Take a look at this small square with a plus sign inside it. Can you count the total number of squares possible in this square? You don't need a formula here because you can just simply look at it and count the number of squares and you get total 5 squares. So the main thing to remember here is that whenever you see a square with a plus sign inside it, it will always make 5 possible squares. I want you to remember this number because this is going to prove very handy in tackling this type 3 questions. Now let's try to count total number of squares in this first figure. When you look at the outermost square or the biggest square, it also contains a plus sign inside it, which means the outermost square or the biggest square will have 5 possible squares inside it. When you look at the medium sized square inside the biggest square, you can see it also contains a plus sign inside it. So thus this square will also make 5 squares. If you observe again, you will see a third square with a plus sign inside it, which means that square will also make 5 possible squares. And thus total number of squares possible in this figure will be 5 plus 5 plus 5, which is equal to 15 squares. And that's our answer. Similarly, when we take a look at this figure, you can simply try to count the total number of squares having plus in them but this would prove a little more complicated if you only focus on squares with plus. So let's use our type 2 concept here along with type 3 concept. If you look at the figure, this figure is a 4 by 4 square, and we already know how to calculate total number of squares in a figure where rows and columns are equal, and this figure will have at least 30 possible squares. Now if we observe carefully, there are 4 squares with plus inside them. As we already know, one square having a plus inside it will make 5 squares, and in this case we have 4 such squares. So total number of possible squares in this figure will be equal to 30 plus 4 times 5, which is equal to 50 squares in total. And that's our answer for this question. Did you know this trick already? Tell me in the comment section below if you did. Also, thank you everyone who are honestly trying to attempt this question right now. So finally, let's move on to the final type of question of today's video. Find the total number of possible squares in this figure. Do you want to give it a try? If yes, pause the video right now and give it a try by yourself. Those who have already tried, let's try to understand this type of question. Now, before solving this one, let's understand one more simple concept for this type of question. Observe this figure. This figure is very similar to the previous type of figure. This figure also has a square with a plus inside it, which means this figure will have minimum 5 possible squares. But this figure has one additional embedded square inside it. So the total number of squares possible in this figure will be 5 plus 1, 6. Now I want you to remember this because this concept will come in handy in solving a big figure question. Now, when we take a look at this figure, we clearly see that there is one square with a plus symbol along with a tilted embedded square. So this figure will make 6 possible squares. Again, there is one more square figure with a plus embedded inside it along with a tilted square. Thus, this figure will also have 6 possible squares. And finally, when we take a look at the innermost figure, this figure has one square with an embedded plus inside it. And we already know a square with a plus inside it makes 5 possible squares. And thus, in this figure now, the total number of possible squares is equal to 6 plus 6 plus 5, which is equal to 17 squares. And thus we finally figured out the total number of squares possible in this type 3 figure. And this is it everybody. This was all for today's video. But before concluding today's video, let's sum it up all the concepts we have learned. So in today's video, we dealt with 4 types of problems, as you can clearly see from this table. In future, directly refer to this table and the short tricks given on the 3rd column of this table, so you don't have to watch the entire video, but you can just quickly revise the formulas by looking at this table only. So in the type 1 problems, we dealt with the squares having different number of rows and columns. That is, the number of rows were not equal to the number of columns. And the trick to calculate the total number of possible squares in type 1 figure was to multiply number of rows into columns, writing the product on right hand side, and in further steps keep on decreasing the number of rows and columns one by one, storing the product on right hand side and doing this until any one among those reaches 1. Or you can clearly refer the formula here: r into c plus r minus 1 into c minus 1 plus r minus 2 into c minus 2 plus until any one among row or column reaches 1. You just sum them up and you get the total number of possible squares inside type 1 figures. Then we saw type 2 figures where number of rows were equal to the number of columns. And in this type of figure, we can use the formula as shown in 3rd column. Or we can simply square each term and add them up. In type 3 problems, here we first got a hold on one concept. A square with a plus sign inside it makes in total 5 possible squares. Thus, remember in this concept, we tackled with these 2 types of problems, and thus you can easily encounter such problems by remembering this simple concept. In type 4 problems, there was an additional tilted square embedded inside the square from a type 3 figure. By remembering this concept in type 4, that this time the total number of squares formed in simple figure is equal to 6, we can easily solve the type 4 problems with very ease. And the trick to remember here is search for the squares with a plus sign and having a tilted square forming inside them. So do not forget this table, or I would like to suggest to copy this table and revise the concepts that we learned in today's video. Also, if you have watched my first episode of the reasoning list, where we discussed about how to calculate the total number of triangles in those figures, and if you haven't watched that video, then please go and check it out. Start this playlist from the first video of the playlist, and that video was also very informative and would come in real handy in order to tackle those type of problems too. Now, in that video, I wasn't able to give any final summation table like this one. That's why I'm giving the final summation table in this video only. This is the table for the previous video. You can easily copy it. If you find any difficulty in understanding the tricks part or the third column of this table, then do go and check out my episode 1 of the reasoning list, where I've shown you how to calculate total number of triangles in such figures. So this is it, everybody. That's it for today's video. Make sure you drop in the comment section that how many questions were you able to solve. Also, don't forget to give your feedback in the comment section about what all improvements or what all new content do you expect on this channel. Also, do not forget to press that subscribe button and the bell icon beside it in order to get the notifications of this channel. Also, it would really boost my confidence in making more such videos. So I would request you to please hit that like button and also share it among your friends and among various groups you are in. Thank you so much for sticking till the end of this video. I'll catch up with you in next video. Until then, keep learning, keep upskilling. See ya.